Bershus, Roshei Yeshiva, members of the administration, our deans. As Rabbi Feldman tweeted, we have a brisker yeshiva, so we have Tzvei Dinim, Rabbi Ari Leibowitz, our new Torah Dean of REITs, and Rabbi Yosef Kalinsky, who, in addition to the undergraduate Torah study, is now the administrative dean of REITs. To all of our esteemed Rebbeim, and of course to our dear students, as we open this Zman. You know, each opening week year is special. Each year has its own character. This year is no different. In addition to the excitement of the fresh beginning and new possibilities for each of you as Talmidim on a year of great intellectual exploration in both your Torah and your Mada, we are also every single day very cognizant that our brothers and sisters in Israel are at war. That many of us, including myself, have children and relatives who are in the army or in reserves. That our hostages are still not all released. One Jew sitting b'shevi in captivity is a catastrophe. Over 100 Jews is an incomprehensible, ongoing nightmare. With so much challenge facing the Jewish people around the world, even here in the United States and also on college campuses. And with all of this turmoil, there is so much opportunity that are presented to the Jewish people, specifically to lead with our Torah values and to help spread Hashem's light to the Jewish community and our entire society. It's with this backdrop that we begin studying a great Masechet Bava Metzia, in which the limud is not only so interesting and substantive, but also, I think, helps clarifies a lot of uncertainties as we move ahead in the future. And we'll get there today by starting to study the different ways as the opening Mishnah, the Din of Yachloku, appears in Sugyot throughout Shas. So let's get to it. Does everybody have a Makoro sheet? Everybody have it up there. Do you have on the second floor? On the second floor. You do. You do. But he doesn't. He's looking. You share. Second floor. You guys have Makoro sheets? You got? Yes? Okay, great. In the corner? Makoro sheets? You're good? And in the back left? Yes? Okay, fantastic. So let's begin. We know the Mishnah starts with the case of two people in dispute about a specific article of metaltalin, about a talis. But just to back up for 1 second, when two people come to Beis Din with a monetary claim, what is the normal rule that we would apply? What would we apply? What is the makar of motzim mechaber al varayis? So if you look at source number 1, the Gemara in Bava Kama says, Amar Reb Shmuel ben Nachmani, Minayim la'motzim mechaber al varaya. Shenamar first quotes a pasuk, Midval bal dvar migash alehem yagish raya alehem, that whoever is the concerned party comes forward to the Beis Din, and the limud is that he's the one who brings proofs for the Beis Din. So the principle of a motzim mechaber al varaya is based on a pasuk. Maskava Ravashi halam alikra svarahu. How do you, if somebody's in pain, it's the person who's in pain that goes to the doctor. So either it's a pasuk or it's a svara, and there's certainly differences between whether one thinks it's a pasuk or a svara. But for us now, how would you explain the svara? Why does this make sense? How does this explain a motzim mechaber al varaya? Just looking at the svara, what do you think it's based on? What would you say? What would motzim mechaber al varaya be based on? If it's a pasuk, it's a pasuk. But it's a svara, why would it be true that the if two people come to Beis Din, the one who's extracting needs to bring the proof. What would you say?
Right now, the Halachah is that it belongs to him, and you're trying to change the status quo.
Yafa. So, I mean, you just look at the person who's trying to change the status quo, and it's on that person who's trying to change the status quo to bring the proof. And therefore, it's a very small claim. It's not claims of ownership and stories. It's just, that's the facts. Either technically you could say that the other person needs to bring the proof. Maybe more fundamentally, that is what bailus is possession. But it's the other person who's trying to change the status quo that has to bring a proof. Any other ways of understanding just a priori the concept of muchsuk and why the motzi would have to bring the proof? Yeah.
If one party is asking Beis Din to do nothing, one party is asking Beis Din to do something, so to activate Beis Din, you need.
Yafeh, maybe just to activate Beis Din, meaning to start the court case that you need. It's that, and that's actually, you look at what the pasuk is saying. If you're rooting in the pasuk, it's the Baal Dvarim that activates the court case. Before that, you don't even have a court case to begin. Yafeh, amazing. And where's Beis Din's role here? Amazing. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Could just be a general statement as to this is obvious. People's stuff is, we assume that people's stuff is their own, as much as we assume that it's not as obvious as it is that you go to the doctor and you say.
Okay, so let's just plumb that just one level further. And your name is? Yaakov. So what does it mean that we assume that people's stuff is their own? Just give me a little more meat on that. What do you mean we assume that people's stuff is our own?
Well, if something's just been in someone's property, in their possession, then why should we assume that it isn't their property and it isn't their object?
Okay, and you're saying it, it's so, I love the language and how careful you're saying it, which is in the negative. Why assume that it's not? Which is one type of formulation, like the chazaka that inesh lo gazlina, and that people aren't thieves. Why assume that it's not? Like it's the best alternative explanation. You could say it a little stronger, which is maybe it's a proof that it is. It's a different nuance, but that part of that same family, which is not just what was mentioned before about, what's your name again? Reuben? Not just what Reuben said before, which is that, whoever's going to change the status quo needs to be the one to bring the proof. But actually being muchzuk is some kind of proof that it's yours, or it's the best alternative explanation that it's actually yours. Yeah?
The role of Beis Din is to protect property rights, so Beis Din's job is to be on the side of the defendant.
That is, I love that question. Wow. What a softball. That is perfect. Say that again. What's your name? Levi. So Levi said, what's this gets to a fundamental point about what's the role of Beis Din. And the way he said it was so brilliant. Is the role of Beis Din to protect property rights? Is that the role of Beis Din? Or does Beis Din have a different role? So let's hold on to that, because that's a great framing. That's a great framing question. With all this as background about a motzi mechaver olav araya, let's dig into a little bit the case of our Mishnah and the parallel cases which Tosfos already brings up into play to understand what are the principles at stake, or how is this applying when it comes to Shnai Muchsam Batalos. So the Mishnah says in source number 2, Shnai Muchsam Batalos, Zeh Omer Ani Mitzatia, Zeh Omer Ani Mitzatia, Zeh Omer Kul Shli, V'Zeh Omer Kul Shli, Zeh Yishav V'Shein Lo B'Pachas Mechatzeh, Zeh Yishav V'Shein Lo B'Pachas Mechatzi, V'Yachloku, and you divide it. Now, is this, if we're just talking about the principles before of Amotzi Mechaver Olav Araya, how does Yachloku fit into that world? If it's all about either, let's just take two contrasting approaches. If it's about, on the one hand, the other person has to bring the proof to change the inertia, or on the other, that it's some kind of proof that the person who's holding it is the owner. Could vayachloku even fit into this world of amotzi mechaver olav haraya? Does that make any sense? And all the Rishonim wrestle with this, plus putting it in conversation with other cases that are similar, where there are two disputants and we don't know where it goes. What are other cases where there are two disputants, we don't know where it goes? So Tosfos talks about two. Tosfos right on Beis Amud Aleph talks about two very prominent cases in this sugya. Number one, this case of the boat, where two people on Bava Basra, Lamed Aleph and Bet are arguing. This one says, "This is my boat." The other one, "This is my boat." And what is the Gemara there, Paskin? Kol Dal Gvar, which means what? Well, one approach to Kol Dal Gvar is it's a wrestling match. You might win that, by the way. You might win that. So either it's a wrestling match or what? Proofs. It could be bringing rayas. So all discussion about what Kol Dal Gvar is. Is it in Bezdin? Is it outside of Bezdin? So, but there's another option of two people coming. We don't know whose it is. We say Kol Dal Gvar. That's one. And the other case that Tosas we'll see in a second talks about is the Mana Shlishis. Two people give nifkad. They give somebody to watch. One gives $200. The other gives $100. And they both claim that they're the ones that gave the $200. The person they gave it to doesn't know. So according to the Rabbanan, each one gets 100. And what happens to the third 100? Munach ad sheyavo Eliyahu. It's another option. Munach ad sheyavo Eliyahu. So you have these three cases. You have two people in dispute over who owns this. In the case of Shnai Muchsin, it's Yachloku. In the case of Ahu Arba, the boat, it's Kol Dal Gvar. And in the case of the Mana Shlishi, it's Ad Sheyavo Eliyahu. How do you decide which of these answers is to the case? And this is certainly something that all the Rishonim here and in Bava Basra, Lamdal, and Bet wrestle with. So we're just going to look through Tosos. If you look at source number 3, Be'achloku, Tema Demaishna Mehida Arba Damar Kol Dal Gvar Periches Sabatim V'Yishlomar Du Uchsin Shani Du Chashiv Ki'ilu Ko Echad Yishlo B'Bavadai HaChetzi Da Anan Sadi Demai Detafis Haididehu. So how would you understand Tosos? What's he saying? So why is this different than Etzahu Arba? The case of the boat, they're not Uchsin. But here, they're oches, they're grabbing it. And since they're grabbing it, therefore what? So they're muchsak, and he uses interesting language of anan sadi. It's like we're testifying that what he owns, that what he has in his hands, he owns. We'll talk more about that. V'chein b'mana shlishi d'mendame gemara l'talis chachav ahu she'nifkad tofis b'chesed shneim kilu heim atzma muchsakim bo. Similarly, when it comes to the case of the mana shlishi, you also have a case where Tosfos is saying, at least, that the nifkad is considered like they're both muchsak in it because they both gave the money to him. L'kach mishani da'asam v'adei d'cha minayahu ve'ein ha'chaluka yechol liot emes u'l'kach yehei munach avol talis diklam eimer d'travayuhu yachloku. And then he says similarly by Shnai Meduk and Bishtar, as opposed to when it comes to the mana shlishi, where there it is not a chaluka sheyechol liot emes, and therefore we say ad she'emunach. So what is Tosfos saying? So first of all, he says that there are two principles. There are two rules in order to get to Yachloku. What are the two rules? What are the two rules to get to Yachloku? It needs to be what? What needs to be in the case? Uchzin and a chaluka sheyechol liot emes. It has to be that you're holding on to it, that you're muchsak, cheskas mamon, that you're holding on to it, and it has to be a division that could be true. If it only has one of those two, it's not going to be yachloku. So in the case of the boat, it doesn't have uchsin, and therefore what? It's called al-ngvar. In the case of Mana Shlishi, there are both oches, but it's not a chalukah shecholiot emes, and therefore it's ad she'emunach. Okay, contrast that for a second with the Rush. If you turn to source number 7, or I should say, even before I get to source number 7, this very much is in line with Rashi and the Ramban, when Rashi and the Ramban say that it very much depends on the taina, very much depends on the claim that is being mentioned by the plaintiffs. Meaning, are you going to be able to say that Anan Sadi, that we have a proof that we're testifying that what he's saying is true? It depends on what they're saying. So if they say, for example, Rashi says, they're not saying in the case of Mekach Memkar that it's both ours, but they're saying we both wove it. That we both, created the talus. Rashi said that case it's impossible that they both did that. That's a case where there's Ramai. Similar to Tosot Chaluka Shelo Yichola Liot Emes, and therefore it's Ad She'emunach. Right? This is in line that the Anan Sadi is proving. It's proving the claim. It's proving the bailus of the person. And in this case, according to Tosfos, the Anan Sadi is that each one owns half, and that this does fit very much with the rules of Amotzi Mechaver Olav Araya. It's that each one owns half, and the muchzakut, the ownership, is a proof. The holding is a proof that he's the owner, and since it could be true, and there's no necessary ramai, so therefore we're going to split it in half. If you look at the Rush has an important nuanced difference in the third line, after the period. Actually, the beginning of the third line. Zekivan d'shnei bam lefneinu muchzakim beguf hatalas. Anu tzrichim lifzok din chaluka. The chol davar shanu biad adam. Chashvina leishahu shalo. Afopi sha'acher ma'er ba'amr shalihi. That he says that kol davar shanu biad adam. Chashvina leishahu shalo. As a possible important diuk, meaning he's not saying it's an Anan Sadi that it's his. He's saying it is his. That anyone who's holding on to it, so that half is his. And the nafkamina between the way he says it, we won't have time to go through the Rush now, and the way that Tosfos, in continuation of Rashi, speaks about it, is that the Rush says even if they both said Ani or Agtia, it's okay. Even if there's Vadei Ramai, it's okay. We'll still split it. Because Amotzu Mecharer V'Araya. How does that make sense? They're not telling the truth. How does it make sense to Amotzu Mecharer V'Araya in this case? What would you say? Reuben? This is what your point is? How would it make sense to say Amotzu Mecharer V'Araya according to the Rush, even if there's Ramai, even if there's deception? And you know that the person can't be telling the truth because they're both saying Ani or Agtia, that I wove it and I wove it. How would you apply a Muslim Mecharer over there? Yeah, because the issue isn't about that the Muksakut being a raya for what the guy is saying, but rather that is the status quo. So as long as that's the status quo, we're going to divide it, and if anyone who wants to change that has to bring a proof that he's changing it. Meaning both the Rush and Tosfos and the Shita, that the reason for this Yachloku is that actually it's applying the rules of Amotzu Mechaver V'Araya, but what they hold about the principle of Amotzu Mechaver V'Araya is different. In one, it's about the Muchzak being a raya, as was it Yaakov who said it? That Yaakov said that the Muchzak is being a raya, and therefore it's Anan Sadi that it's his, and you need it to actually prove what he's coming to do. And in contrast, as it's just the status quo, and therefore even if there's Ramai, it's still the status quo. There's still Muchzakos Hamotzu Mechaver V'Araya. Okay, that's all in the realm of Yachloku of the Mishnah being a motzi mechaver olav araya. The Gemara, however, at least raises another possibility. If you look at source number 8, the Gemara says, Lema masnisan delo kesumchas. Let's say the Mishnah is not like sumchas. Di kesumchas omar maman muto b'safei cholkin below shvua. That if it's like sumkis, then it's a maman muto b'safek, and you're cholkin without shvua. What's the case of sumchas? What's the case of sumchas? So there are two cases and more, but so that's the first one, which is what? Shore gores a pregnant cow. And the Vlad dies, and the Vlad, they come to the situation, they find the Vlad dead, and they're not sure if the Vlad died beforehand or because of the goring. The difference being whether the mazik has to pay for it. And what does the Mishnah say? What do? Yachloku, we divide it, and the Gemara says, we'll talk about that as sumchas. What's the other case of sumchas? Say again. Amachlech par b'chamor. When we look inside, look at source number 9. Amachlech par b'chamor, v'yolda, v'chein amocher shevchaso v'yolda, ze'amar ad shlo macharti v'ze'amar mishal lakachti, yachloku. So they're trading the par and the chamor, and calf is born. And the question is, when was the calf born? Was the calf born before it was sold or after it was sold? The difference being, is it the mocher possession or is it the lokach's possession? Each one claims a possession of it. So the Mishnah says, Yachloku. If you look at the Gemara in line number 4, the Gemara says, towards the end, Amay Yachloku, v'lichsei b'rishus taman kaima, u'labi'ida chamotzu mechver olav araya. Why is it Yachloku? Let's just look at the rishus of where it is and say hamotzu olav araya. What does it mean, look at the rishus where it is? Meaning if the calf is sitting in the mocher's rishus, then what does the mocher have? A cheskas mamon, and therefore we should immediately leave it in the hands of the mocher or in the lokach. How do you get to Yachloku? So the Gemara first answers, Amar Reb Chia bar Avin Amar Shmuel bo Mendes ba'agam shivchanami dekaima besimta. We're talking at a place where there is no cheskas mamon. It's not standing in the rishus of either one. So the Gemara says, but what about v'nukma cheskas tamari kama u'li'aviida chamotz mechver olav araya? So why don't you see cheskas marikama? There's a cheskas mamon, which is what a person's holding on to right now. The cheskas marikama of the chazaka of who was the last known owner, and just move that forward. Why don't we just do that? So the Gemara answers, no, because hamani sumchasi. This is according to Sumchas da'amar mamon amuto b'safek chokin below shvua. That this is according to Sumchas, who says that this case of mamon muto b'safek, and that this is a case of mamon muto b'safek, you divide without a shvua. So for Sumchas, mamon muto b'safek as overruns, or in such a case, hamotzu mechver olav araya does not apply. And this is a whole new principle. We started off this year by talking about motzu mechver olav araya as a fundamental principle driving a lot of the conversation. But here we see that there's another principle. Mamon mutal b'safek is cholkin. In hamotzu mechver olav araya, the tainos are attacking each other, and you're trying to sift through the tainot and decide who's right and who's wrong and where it should land. But in a case of mamon mutal b'safek, where it's not the tainos, but the mamon is mutal b'safek, so there Sumcha says yachloku, and the Gemara says there are two ways of understanding yachloku. Either the case of shema v'shema, where both the plaintiffs are uncertain, or it's a case of bari v'bari, where they both are asserting with certainty the facts. So there are two ways of understanding Sumchas. Going back to our Gemara in Bava Metzia, if you go back to our Gemara in Bava Metzia, the Gemara says, Lema mastisan delo kesumchas. Di'i kesumchas ha'amar maman muto b'safek cholken below shvua. The Gemara compares our Mishnah to Sumchas's psak that it wouldn't be in harmony with the assumption. That this too would be a case that would fit into the world of Maman Muto B'Safek, or it wouldn't be consistent with the psak of Sumchas of a Maman Muto B'Safek is Chokin. Now, if I asked you to take a step back, why would Maman Muto B'Safek be Chokin? What would you say? So look at Tosfos for a second. Going back to source number 3, at the end of Tosfos, the last two lines, the middle of the line, Ulusumchas afagav de'ein muchsakim bo ve'ein achluki yichol liot emes heicha di'ika George Mamona perish shabalo tanisem yesh safek lebezdin yachloku. When it comes to Sumchas, remember there were two requirements for saying yachloku according to Tosfos for our Mishnah. What were the two requirements? Uchsin and achaluka sheyichol liot emes. The case of Sumchas, is anybody oches? No. Could it be a chaluka sheyichol liot emes? No. And nevertheless, there's yachloku. Why is there yachloku? So To's saying there's a whole other halacha that when the suffix is below tainusam, when it's a fundamental suffix in the circumstances, not based on the tainus, so then you have another chaloku. Why would you say this is yachloku? How would you understand that? Simply. What kind of yachloku is this? Is the yachloku of a motzim mechaver olav araya? Say again? It's a suffix, and therefore what kind of, put it into other words, it's specific, and therefore it's more trying to be as fair as possible. It goes back to the question what Bez is doing. It's a pshara, it's a compromise. We know it's not really both of theirs. We're trying to do as best as we can to create equity. And it's true, the one person who really owns it won't get it, but both of them will have something. So, in the first two understandings of the concept of Yachloku, at least presented in Shnayim Uchsin, the Yachloku is really just Hamotzim Mechaver Olav Araya in two variations. But when the Gemara introduces Sumchas, it introduces a new possibility. That the Yachloku is a pshara, it's a compromise. And that emerges from Sumchas. When I was your age, I had the privilege of hearing shiurim by Moreno Verbena Rav Shechter in his Kol Chaburos, and we were doing the beginning of Bava Metzia. And I remember, and I checked my notes to see it, and then afterwards I saw that Rav Shechter prints in the Ginos Egos as well, that Rav Shechter said that pointed to the understanding of Sumchas is very different whether it's Shema v'Shema or Bari v'Bari. That when it's Shema v'Shema and both are coming with the claims of Shema, so it undermines any muchzakus. And that's a case where there's no muchzakus there and it's a pshara, it's a compromise. But when the plaintiffs are coming with a Bari v'Bari, actually something else is happening. If you look at source number 11, the last line in Tosfos, Va'od beparak hashol perish, D'chol maman amuta b'safek chashiv kilu shneim muchzakim bo. That there's a muchzakus of Jor de Mamona. That there's a muchzakus of Jor de Mamona. That they're both muchzak in a case of Jor de Mamona. That it's not an issue of pshara, that Sumchas is not talking about compromise. He's talking about that they're both muchzak, and that's why you divide it. Now, just to sharpen this point and how incredible this is, according to at least some achronim, I quoted you the Kuntras Hasveikos over here. According to Sumchas, this chazaka would even beat this case of Jor de Mamona, Cheskes Drama would even beat a Cheskes Mamo. Meaning, even if the calf was in someone's possession, the cheskas dror de mamona would be the decisive factor, and you would split it. Because shneim muchzakim. Now, how do you understand shneim muchzakim in this case? It defies all of the rules that we could think about when we think about chazaka. You know, if it's a question of status quo and where there's no status quo, this fundamentally besafek, the whole place, it's fundamentally besafek. If it's a question of cheskas mamon, over here we don't even care where it's cheskas mamon, and these two, whether they have it or not have it, according to Kunshas Vegos, is irrelevant. What is the Shnei Muchzakim? What are they both? How are they both muchzik in it? You know, one step further is the Tosas Rabbeinu Peretz, who explains that Shnei Muchzakim, or being muchzak, is that they're shaykh to it. The dror demona, when Tosas says below Tainesayim Yesafik, he means that they're both of some shaykhs to it. But what is their shaykhs to it? The fact that both are shaykh to it. How does that create a muchzakus that is decisive, let alone one that we would abide by, even if a single individual there has a cheskas mamon? And what I'd like to suggest as a jumping off point is that what this highlights is the Torah's perspective on ownership in general and muchzakus very specifically. You see, in the Western tradition, there is a sense that there's an inherent connection between a person and his objects, in which ownership is absolute. You know, John Locke famously said that everyone has three inalienable rights: life, liberty, and... So Americans switch it to pursuit of happiness, but actually what John Locke said is life, liberty, and property. And that's an inherent right for every single individual. Well, in Judaism, there are no inalienable rights. Everything is a gift from Hashem. And it's very pronounced when it comes to property. La Hashem ha'aretz umloa. Everything is owned by Hashem. Hashem puts it in this world to be used by humanity, va'aretz natan livnei adam, but the inherent owner, the absolute, is Hashem. Now, the Torah believes that the world needs the concept of personal property, right? In order, the world should not, otherwise would descend into chaos. It's not a communist philosophy, but it always keeps the sense of personal property in perspective. So what does that mean? Ownership in Halachah means that you have rights to the property. You have permission for exclusive usage. No one else can take it without your permission. But since there's no absolute inherent ownership, it's a very different perspective. It's more like it's more yours than it's others. But others aren't so far away from it. The question of ownership is who is the priority to use it right now. It's like the owner is first online, so it goes to him. But other people, everyone else, they're very close. Like they're number two. And because of that, competition can easily rise. So for example, this is how great Jewish thinkers like the Maharal explain the laws of Aveda. In theory, one could say, somebody who finds an Aveda should be able to use it. What else would you do with it? So the Chiddush of a Shabbos Aveda is that the person who is original owner still has some connection to it, or the Chiyuv creates the connection to it, so you need to try and return it to him. But it's not hard for that connection to be severed. Meaning if the owner is mityaesh, it's gone. Or shaftu nar, meaning if it's totally out of the first owner's control. The reason why it's so easy to lose ownership, it's because it's never fundamentally yours in the first place. You have possession, so you can use it. Possession is 9/10 of the law, a yesod of Reuben's formulation, perhaps, of muchzakus. But because our understanding is that all of our property is not inherently connected to us, but at the moment we have exclusive permission to use it, it can be lost easily. Now, the world of muchzak highlights this essential point. No one really owns it. The question we're asking is, who is the priority to use it? So in the cases in which the circumstances are clear, but the tainot are competing, we say the one who's holding it has the muchzakus, either because it's possession and that's it, the other guy has to change the status quo, or as Yaakov said, it's proof that the origin story is the correct one. And that's how we would go. But in a case where the whole situation is besafek, where it's fundamentally unclear, below Tainisayim, it's besafek, it's mamon, mutel besafek, and both are bari in their claims, then they're both are shayach to it in a way that would exclude others. It moves the case to ben shneim. They don't have proofs that their origin story is more right than the other one. They don't have possession of it, but we know that Hashem wants it to be used. And when we look at who is online, their claims are better than the other claims. So they are both ahead of the others online. And that's basically muchzakus. Meaning in the concept of understanding La Shema Aretz Umloah and the perspective of personal property always as the rights to it, but not the inalienable, inherent, absolute ownership. It shifts the whole conversation to when they're competing goods and when they're competing people. And this point is essential to understand life, that the whole world in Halachah of Bailus is about rights. And it distinguishes, for example, Nezikin from Seder Nashim. Right? There's a great, the Gemara asks, if you look at the last source, the Gemara asks, what if you try to marry Chatzech Mekudeshet Li? You say to a woman, half of you is Mekudesh to me. Does that work? Can you be half married? Can you say Yachloku? So the Gemara says, Isha Rachman Avochati Isha, Chanami Isha Rachman Avochati Ish. You can't be, what are you talking about? You can't be half married. That's crazy. Why? Because there are two different ways we interact with the world. What I call the consumer versus the covenant. And one of the fundamental problems we have today is that our society is a consumer world, and therefore we often get this confused. We live in a consumer society, one in which the acquisition of goods, products, and status are often seen as not means to an end, but an end to itself. The great public intellectual, rabbinic leader, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, once lightly put it this way: the consumer society was laid down by Steve Jobs coming down the mountain with two tablets, the iPad 1 and the iPad 2. And the result is now we have a culture of iPod, iPhone, iTunes, I. And the focus of the I fosters a very individualistic, egocentric culture in which one is constantly reminded by product placements of all that one does not have instead of being thankful for what one has. And the result is obvious. We've created a society that are unhappy, that are dissatisfied. But there's another model of life which is not based on the consumer but based on the covenant. And it's established at Har Sinai. Am Yisrael said, when Hashem says, I have the Torah for you, Am Yisrael answers, Naseh v'nishma. We will do and we will understand. It's a very strange phrasing. Usually one needs to hear the instructions and only afterwards can agree to execute the actions. How do you do without first understanding? So Chazal explain the covenantal relationships are very different from the very beginning. In a consumer society, knowledge precedes commitment. One needs to know what one is buying before deciding on the exchange, and the more you know, the better position you're in. How many people are in SciSim School of Business? How many people are in SciSims? There's nobody in the Beis Medrish that's in the SciSim School of Business. How many people are in the SciSims? Okay, we have one table. I have to tell Dean Wasserman that the numbers are not speaking the truth. A lot of people in SciSims. Does anybody know who SciSims was? So SciSims used to own this store, clothing stores, and he had a very well-known commercial. How many people here know this commercial? Okay, only the Rebbeim. What, you know the commercial? How would you know the commercial? Rabbi Rosenzweig quoted it? Wow. Okay, now I have a mucker from my Rebbe. I didn't watch it. I just heard it from Rabbi Rosenzweig. Totally different. So what did SciSim say? An educated consumer is our best customers. The best customers are the ones who know the most about the product. That is a consumer relation. The more you know, the better it is. But the covenantal relationship, it's the opposite. Commitment precedes knowledge. One cannot even access the knowledge until one first is fully committed. You can't even understand Torah unless you're sitting and you're committed to working, not just in the day, but deep into the night. You have to sweat, and you have to work, and you have to be committed, and you have to break your teeth before you understand it. It's the naaseh before the nishma. And that's the covenantal relationship we have with Torah, with Hashem. It's also true when it comes to dating. You know, when I served as a pulpit rabbi, I would often advise people who are dating about marriage, and I always struck with those who came with long checklists about what they were looking for in a spouse. You know, they would include detailed style of dress, specified number of hours a day in religious study, a very specific type of personality, and a list of acceptable institutional affiliations and professional occupations. Now, of course, compatibility is important, but a checklist isn't how it's going to be found, because relationships, unlike purchases, are something that evolve and deepen. They're created together. A purchase is unilateral. If a car doesn't meet your specifications, it won't serve your purposes. But marriage is covenantal. It's not about objects, but about relationships, and requires leaps of faith. You know, C.S. Lewis, on his book on grief, which describes his profound loss after his wife passed away, said that it wasn't what he knew about her that was the magic. It was the alterity. It was the mystery. It was the different and unexpected ways in which his wife grew and evolved, which pushed him to grow and evolve as well. It's different than a consumer. In a consumer model, you acquire possessions. If it doesn't meet what you wanted, you claim mekachtos. What's going on over here? Knowledge, metrics, research, analytics. Consumers prioritize the known and the certain. But the model of covenant is different. It prizes faith, empathy, commitment, loyalty, curiosity, resilience, and discovery. There's, of course, comfort to being a consumer. One knows the product, you read the warranty, you have an instruction manual. There's very little risk. In the covenantal, you don't know what's going to happen. There's exposure, there's vulnerability, there's uncertainty, there's great risk. But the upside is different as well. The consumer is only transactional. The covenantal is transformational. One of our primary challenges of each of us as B'nai Torah living in this society, living in a consumer culture, is confusing the two modalities. One should not go to the supermarket and approach their purchase of breakfast cereal like they were forming a covenantal bond with it. And one must not seek a spouse with the perspective of a consumer. When these lines are crossed, it creates problems. On the one hand, people fall in love with their cars, their vacations, their corner offices. And on the other hand, people do not truly fall in love with their spouses, their purpose, or those around them. Living in a consumer society as we do can affect our thinking, deeply impacting fundamental aspects of our lives, including the way we date, build relationships, and plan for our future. And this is one of the fundamental lessons about Metzia. When it comes to property, and we're talking about metaltalin, maybe we'll speak about karka, certainly karka in Israel differently, but when it comes to property, you have rights to it. You do not have a relationship with it. Because it's just rights, it can be easily lost. We'll use chazakas to determine cases, and in the case of cheskas dror de mamona, we'll even use shaykhus to create new partnerships that never existed in an origin story. All this reinforces the message to not be confused about your goals in life. Property is a means. Relationships are the goal. And from this, there are two takeaways that I want to get across just briefly in the small amount of time that I have left. The first is because property is not inherent and absolute ownership, it's just a means, you need to recognize that it's not only a means for you. The whole expanse of the Masechet brings you, the property owner, into a conversation about your responsibilities to others. Take ribbis. Why can't I have my money work for me? It's my money. What's wrong with that? So Halachah teaches you actually no, you have to be concerned about the lender's welfare. Your money has to be concerned also about the lender's welfare. Oh no. The free market. Buyer beware. I need to be concerned that the buyer doesn't know the true costs of goods? Isn't that his problem? No, actually the answer is yes. Yeah, no, that's your problem too. Because ownership of the Torah kind gives you rights and responsibilities. And you need to see your money not just as a means to sustain yourself, but to help others. And we live in this Western culture that's so deeply informed with the sense of property. And while we share that private property is important, creates rules and orders for society, capitalism creates human flourishing, all of this is very positive, and there's no doubt about that, and the Torah, no doubt about that. We also keep it in perspective, both in terms of our relationship with Hashem, Hashem Ha'aretzum Loah, and how Hashem wants us to consider others in our usage for it, which is why Yachloku is such a great option when warranted, because that too is our goal. To lift up others too is part of our mishpat. As someone asked, what is Bezdin? Who asked that? That was so great. Bezdin's purpose. What a great frame. Is Bezdin's purpose to protect private property? So, emet u mishpat shalom shaftu b'sharecha, Zechariah says. Meaning, the shalom, the other, is also mishpat. That's also part of it. You know, the tzedek, tirdov, tzedek is din, and tzedek pshara is both tzedek. That's also part of it. There's a much broader sense of not just your rights, your personal rights and your responsibilities, and the goals of Bezdin, and how that all these multi-values, the sliding scale, depending on the unique circumstance, you know, is it uchzin, is it chaluka sheyachol liot emes, if it can't be emes on any way, like all of these factors, kol da'on gvar, all these factors come into play because we're balancing a whole coterie of values. There are multiple core Torah values. I only mentioned 5 of them, but there are multiple core Torah values underneath those 5 that exist, and that's being played out. And that is exactly, Bezdin's sophisticated role in this. Or, I love what you said about triggering Bezdin, what is part of official Bezdin, what is outside of Bezdin, but still their purpose. Issues like Kol Da'on Gvar, when it's officially a court case, when it's not, when they can get involved officially, when they're getting involved in other capacities. All of this is part of this conversation. And so the key of Yachloku is to recognize that actually it's an answer that benefits everyone. And in this case, the consumer who solely focuses on the I and what's missing from life, their personal property, is perennially driven to fill that hole through more material goods. And as we said before, creating mechanisms of fundamental unhappiness, while the Jewish notion that we also focus on the we guides one to live one's life with a greater sense of purpose so that others are not strangers, teaching one to be thankful for what one has, not focus on your life ambitions, filling your own needs alone, but to look for opportunities in which you can fulfill the needs of others. So that's the first takeaway. Because ownership is seen in the context of Hashem Aretz Law in a perspective, it's just your rights, it's just a means. So you should understand that the means have a much greater sense of what it should be used for. Not just for yourself, but for others in the whole coterie of values. And the second point, just to highlight what I was saying to before, is never mix up rights with relationships. I am telling you, it's the key to life. And I'm telling you how many students and how many people in this country are getting this mixed up, and it is fundamentally hurting them. There's a difference between being a consumer interaction, and a covenantal one. And it's a whole different set of rules about knowledge before commitment, commitment before knowledge, about what actually is fundamental and transformational and what is only transactional. And you're coming to Yeshiva University, many of you for the first time, and you're going to study, and you should study, how to succeed greatly in your life. And it's going to be important that you do. But please keep in mind that all of the material success, that the material peace are just means. That's not the goal. The goal is not the rights, but the relationships, which include your future wife. It includes all of your friends who are here with you. It includes your rabbeim. Your rabbeim that you make here at Yeshiva University will be your rabbeim for life. Our mashkichim, who love you with their heart and soul. They love you this year, and they love you throughout your years. The greatest brachot in my life include my rabbeim that have walked with me and continue to walk with me on my own personal journey and this great journey of yeshiva. The way you think about your career is not just for acquiring goods and material benefits, but actually how your career is going to help others, and how if you're driven and if you're in if you're driving the economy, you're actually helping others as well and lifting others. It should be part of your consciousness, the achloku consciousness of even your success materially, of how you care about and are raising others. Your mada, which is not just about success, but developing yourself as B'nai Torah. Your relationship, of course, with Torah and with Hashem. You are here to develop all of these. Not about your rights, but about your relationships. And it's very important to spend your time both in the content of Bava Metzia, to see how you keep your perspective on property and consumerism, using it wisely and generously, but even more important, for you to engage with the Torah of Bava Metzia as Davar Hashem. Because every single moment you are sitting here, you are engaged with Davar Hashem. And that interaction with Davar Hashem is about not just the knowledge of Bava Metzia, but your long-term relationship with Torah and with Hashem. With all of the suffix around in the world today, in Israel and our society, you have something special here. You have something special to develop. Each of you are gifted with your own gifts and what makes you unique, and you have something special to bring out to the world. And with all of the sfeikos, it is this that we have as a vadai, is that your rabbeim, deans, faculty, staff, administration, parents, all people here, we have vadai confidence in you, that you will grow and develop as B'nai Torah and go out and make us all proud as you Mekadesh Shem Shemayim in all that you do. I wish you much hatzlacha and great success this year in your learning. Thank you.
Kapitel Pei Gimel. Shir Mizmor La'asaf. Elohim al damilach al techerash al tishkod el. Ki hine oivecha yemayun umisanecha nasu yosh. Al amcha yarimu sor visyatzu al tifunecha. Amro lechuv nachidei migoy lo yitacher shem Yisrael. Ki noatzu lev yachtav alecha bris yichrosu. Ahalei Edom Yishmaelim Moav Hagerim. Geval v'amon v'amalek Peleshes im Yoshvei Tzor. Gam Ashur nilva imam hayuzer olivnei lo tzela. Asay lahem kimidyon kisisirachi avin v'nachal kishon. Nishmedu ve'ein dar hayu domen la'adama. Shiseimo nidiveimo karev v'chizevu chezevechu chetzal muna kol nesicheimo. Asher amru nir shalanu eis neos Elohim. Elohai shisemu chagalgal kikash leifnei ruach. Keish tivar yar uchila havat leheid harim. Kein tir defeim b'sarachov sufasachase v'halein. Milei fneihem kalon vivakshu shimcha Adonai. Yevoshu vibhalu adayad vyachberu vyovedu. Vyedu ki ata shimcha Adonai levadecha elyon al kol haaretz. Kuf lamed shem alos yamakim kerasicha Adonai. Adonai shima v'koili tiyenos necha kashuvo sakot achanunai. Im avoinos tishmor ya Adonai miyamod. Ki im chaslicha leman tivarei. Ki visi Adonai kivso nafshi v'li dvaro hochalti. Nafshi Adonai mishomerim laboker shomerim laboker. Yachel Yisrael el Adonai ki im Adonai achesed v'arbei mofidos. V'hu yifdes Yisrael mikol avonosov. Kuf mem beis maskil David v'yosov ha'me'ara sefilah. Koli el Adonai ezak, Koli el Adonai eschanan. Eshboch lefanav sichit, Zarasi lefanav agin. V'hisatef alai ruchi v'atayadat nesivasi, borach zu alech tam nufach li. Habed yamin urei ve'ini makir avad manos mimeni ein doresh nafshi. Za'ati elecha Adonai amarti ata machsi chelki beretz hachayim. Hakshiva el minasi ki dalosi meod hatzileni meod defoi ki amtzu mimeni. Hotzia mimazger nafshi lehodos eshemecha biyachtiru tzadikim ki sigmol aloi. Achenu kol beis Yisrael nesunim b'tzar v'shivyon dim bein bayom v'yav shama kom yachim aleim v'yotzim b'tzar l'vachom v'lo l'oira u'mishivu l'gula hashto b'agav zman karev v'noimar amen.